Welcome to The Neighborhood, a Mr. Rogers tribute podcast. I'm your host, Rick Lee James of rickleejames.com, and I run the Mr. Rogers Quotes Twitter account found at Mr. Rogers Say. As we again walk into this podcast neighborhood, we want you to know that no matter where you are from, you are welcome here. I'm glad to be your neighbor. Every daughter, every son, every tribe, and every tongue, in the spirit of Fred Rogers and the life of welcome that he lived, welcome to the neighborhood. This week in the neighborhood, we have a very special bonus episode with a very special guest, Luke Flowers. Luke is an author and illustrator from Colorado Springs, Colorado. He has illustrated over 50 children's books since 2014, including Disney's The Muppet Christmas Carol storybook and his own top-selling series, Moby Shinobi, which has a new chapter book releasing on December 26, 2019. Luke has created work for a range of clients that include Disney, Scholastic, Random House, Little Golden Books, Nickelodeon, and many more. He recently illustrated the New York Times bestseller, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, Poems by Fred Rogers. He's here for a visit today, and I'm just thrilled about it. Luke Flowers, welcome to the neighborhood.
Well, thank you, neighbor. That's a great introduction.
Well, you know, there's just so much good to tell about you, and I'm really excited to have the chance to talk. I have really loved not only the poems of Fred Rogers and the songs that are in this great book, but your art just adds so much to it. So I appreciate you being here to talk today and sharing your talent. And just at the beginning of the show, I want to remind all of our listeners that if they go to our website, which is you can either type in fredrogerspodcast.com or welcomeneighbor.podbean.com, and we will have links to your website and the different books, including A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. So just wanted to let everybody know that as we begin today. Well, Luke, I have a question that's more personal in nature about what you do before we get into the actual Fred Rogers book, because I think my audience would just love to get to know a little bit more about you. I wonder, what does a day in the life of an author and illustrator like yourself look like?
Oh, that's a great question. Usually I spend most of my just working day on children's books. I usually work on about 8 books a year on average. It used to be upwards of like 12, but that was getting to be a little too much.
Wow.
That's how, I mean, I really started in, 2015 was my first published, book with a major publisher. And so, in 5 short years, it was a lot to get 50 books done. So I slowed up the pace quite a bit last year, although it was still about 8 is enough for me.
Amazing.
So really, I mean, it's mostly, volleying back and forth between, different publishers and processes. A lot of times I'll have, one book that I'm working on, actual full illustrations. I might be working on one that's in sketching phase, and I'm always kind of working on writing the next Moby Shinobi book series as well. So.
Well, you know what? I have not had the opportunity to read Moby Shinobi yet, but my son and I, last night, my son is 6, and we went on to our library website, and we put 3 of the books on hold, so we're looking forward to bringing those home and being able to read them together.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I wonder, you're so good at what you do, and it's obvious that you have found your calling in just illustrating and writing, but was it always your dream to write children's books specifically?
To be honest, I mean, it was like in 2nd grade, I can really remember just wanting to be an artist of some kind, and that was, a lot of it was just inspired by really starting to get familiar with like the work of Jim Henson and, just growing up with like Sesame Street, and I love the fact that they had, not only the puppetry, which I was just instantly in love with, but, just the animation, they had stop motion, they had actual, 2D animation, they had live action, they had, just so many elements of art that I just really appreciated it. So it made me kind of think like I'd love to be an artist. I didn't know what, actually avenue that would look like. And so it wasn't until a little bit later, as I got into more like high school and college, I really started to think, storytelling paired with illustration. Mm-hmm. Really, I think a lot of that started to go hand in hand with just growing up loving Shel Silverstein's books as well, and just seeing how fun it is to have the play of a whimsical illustration and these like really, clever poems. And so I think that's when I really started to think, well, that would be a fun avenue to kind of help tell stories through. And that's why a lot of the books I write are written in rhyme. It's just, because I grew up just loving a lot of poetry type books, rhyming books. Of course, we all grew up, at least in my era, learning to read from Dr. Seuss. So I think for me, it was a lot of those were the foundations of that journey. So,
sure.
But like I said, I worked for 10 years for Young Life as their creative director out after I graduated college. So I spent about 10 years really trying to figure out how to pursue that dream full time. While just trying to keep the lights on. I was just a newly married, husband out of college, and so just trying to start a family up. And so it was really a job that helped me kind of get some chops in the art world. And I had grown up at the Young Life camps in Colorado. My parents both worked for them. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was a journey that was kind of, I always say it looked kind of like a subway map, because it was kind of all these different avenues until I can, finally figured out the route that put me on the path I really felt, I was really called to it. And it was really, about 10 years into working at Young Life in a creative design studio as a designer mainly, I just knew I really wanted to be doing illustration full time. And I had a friend just come to me and said, I don't know if you're being true to yourself. You've struggled for a long time to want to, make this leap. Why don't you just go for it? And so that was really about in 2010 that I decided just to really, do my best to figure out how to get into the children's book illustration industry. And I got really fortunate with some connections, like the Moby Shinobi one right out of I guess that was around 2015. Mm-hmm. And then that just kind of started to open more and more doors. And so it's been a very interesting journey. I always feel like, I felt like I was late to the game in getting into the children's book industry. And so maybe that's why I was doing so many to get caught up so quickly in such a short time. But I really think it was all in the right time. I think the opportunities that have come have been at the right time, and it's definitely been just a maturing process. And I don't know if I would have been able to handle some of that pressure and some of the just demands of it at a younger age. So I'm thankful for it.
Well, it must be very rewarding to share these inspiring books that you've helped to create and that you've created. And I think Fred Rogers would probably be very proud of the way that your work is helping to inspire children to learn and to read and to pursue their dreams as well. So let's talk a bit about Fred Rogers this morning,
sure.
Which is really why you're here.
Yes.
Everyone I talk to on this show especially, they seem to have a Fred Rogers story of a way that he influenced them in some way in their life. I wonder, what is your Fred Rogers story?
For me, it was just growing up with the show. Again, I didn't grow up with the really early episodes. It was still on when I was a kid back in the 80s. But that was sort of the tail end of it. But of course, I got to enjoy it in reruns. And so a lot of it was just, again, I loved puppets growing up. The Muppets were just a huge influence on me, just as far as just the creativity of it and the imagination of it. So I just love that Mr. Rogers was a little bit different, and his show was a little bit slower. And growing up, I grew up in a really small town and on a farm, and we didn't actually have neighbors, so it was almost a new kind of concept for me, just to see a neighborhood and a city that was. I loved not only the puppets and the land of make-believe, but the, that he would go around and visit these places. I'd never seen a recycling center. I'd never seen how crayons had been made. So for me, I was really drawn to just those little outings into the neighborhood. And so for me, growing up as a kid, that was sort of, an interesting look into a bigger world. And then again, I didn't, reconnect with, Mr. Rogers, the neighborhood really until I'd had our own kids, and then really even most recently it was with the Won't You Be My Neighbor documentary. I had actually just gone to see it and left the theater just like anybody that's seen it, just absolutely in love with just Mr. Rogers again in a different way, being a parent and kind of seeing it from the adult's perspective. it was interesting because I left the theater and I just told my wife, I was just really moved by it. I said, that's the kind of message, that's kind of like work. How do I either do something in that same vein or even celebrate the work of Mr. Rogers? How do, I started thinking like, I'd love to do a children's book of that. And it was interesting because it wasn't, but maybe, gosh, a month or two later that Quirk came and asked me, would you be interested in doing this? I'd never mentioned Mr. Rogers to them or anything.
Wow.
So it was Doogie Horner who was the art director. He's also an author and comedian, illustrator, a man of many talents. But he came to me and just said, hey, I saw some of your stuff at a gallery. I do a lot of illustration or gallery shows out at a gallery called Gallery 1988 in LA. And he'd have to either see it out there or online or something. He said, I saw that you look like you do some great, pop culture type stuff. Would you be interested even in Mr. Rogers? And so, right there, I just told him, I just saw this film. I'm absolutely all in on this. So it was, again, I felt like it was a godsend, really.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And to think that really it was just last year when that documentary came out. So you had a lot of work to do, didn't you? And really seemingly a short amount of time, because it's a thick book and there's a lot of illustrating in there for sure. So, well, I wonder, because I am just clueless about this. I always loved drawing, and as a kid I always thought it would be the coolest thing. And I still love comic books, and I still love all kinds of creative things. And it's really fun for me with my son right now, who, by the way, neither of us at this point are very good artists, but we enjoy it. We like doing it. But I just have in my imagination, what it must be like to illustrate a book. So I just want to pick your brain a bit about the whole process. What was your approach in illustrating this book in particular? Did you make art that was based on the poems themselves, or did you find that you were diving into maybe old episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhoods and trying to maybe recreate some of the scenes there? What really was sort of your process in an endeavor like this?
Yeah, that's a great question too. For me, and you had mentioned, it was a pretty quick turnaround. So this was a sort of pressure cooker situation, and that was one of the things they said, are you interested in this? It's going to be a really quick turnaround and a lot of, illustrations. I think we ended up doing about 80 some illustrations. But, of course I was just like, whatever, I'm going to make this happen, just I was all in on it. So again, I just felt like it was a divine inspiration that like the energy, the focus, just everything seemed to click really quickly on this project. Again, growing up and knowing a lot of the songs and the poems and the characters really helped. So I just kind of already, knew I wanted to kind of render the characters and the colors, and just the spirit of the show really is what I really wanted to capture. And even just going back to kind of wanting to capture the essence of, the simplicity of the show, and just making the illustrations very, just simple and easy to, just a quick read for kids. And again, they kind of set it up. They said it's going to be kind of a Shel Silverstein-esque, approach to the book style as far as very simple illustration paired with a poem. And so, of course, I'm like, this is just couldn't get better. Two of my, creative heroes and people that shaped my childhood. So it was with that same spirit of just thinking like, how did, what was it I loved about the Shel Silverstein poems and the way he just had the perfect image to go with the poem that, didn't over tell the story, but let the kid kind of imagine it.
Yeah.
And so, we were really turning these quickly. I was super thankful. Andy Reid, she was the art director on it after, Doogie kind of handed over to her. So working with her and, just the Quirk team was amazing. And the fact that, they were just, made it so easy to get, they really gave me a ton of creative freedom. I was thankful that, the Fred Rogers company as well, were really gracious. And, even on the cover, we, kind of stylized Daniel Tiger and Exial and King Friday the 13th a little bit. So I was really thankful that they let me have a little bit of my style in approaching it.
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge for us was just trying to find the look for Mr. Rogers in, making it somewhat recognizable, but still, my style is pretty whimsical.
Yeah.
And so and again, I just feel like it came together the right way that it needed to, and I didn't, it wasn't over laborious, and
yeah. Well,
just,
I'm sorry for interrupting. I
Oh,
didn't
no,
mean
no,
to.
yeah.
Well, I love that you used the word whimsical to describe your art, because I know that a number of times, just listening to old interviews and things that Fred Rogers had written, he would say things like, "I just love whimsy." He would say, and I feel like your art is really the perfect marriage between his words and the way that you are able to express yourself as well. It just makes me wonder. This is going to totally be like asking a person which child is your favorite that you have. But I wonder, was there an illustration or a song or a poem in the book that you really found to be your favorite, or that just really has a lot of meaning or spoke to you more than any other throughout the book?
Yeah, I think the one of my favorite was just that intro one of, the land of make believe. It was just, again, it was so fun to just, that was one of my favorite places to visit in the show. And so to be able to just go in and really try to capture that, and just, again, that's one of the ones that when I, do book events and show to kids, it kind of helps them understand a little bit more about, it wasn't just, Mr. Rogers, but it was these puppets in this world that he kind of helped bring to life. So I really love that one. But probably one of my favorite illustrations was the one of Jeff, for the song "It's You I Like."
Oh yeah.
Just because that was one of my favorite moments in the documentary, and just remembering how special that episode was, and so
Jeff
that
Erlanger, I
yeah.
believe his name was, yes.
But then as I've gotten to go out and do book tours with kids, the one of my favorite ones to do with them is the doing song, just because it's so silly, and so it's a great way to get kids into, we get up and we do all the actions together, and it's really fun. It kind of gives an energy to a poetry book that sometimes, I think sometimes kids might, it's some of them are fairly slow, and so that's always a fun one to kind of break up the, reading poetry and getting kids up and going. And
now, is that the one that you've got to do it? That song, is that what you're talking about? The doing song, or I might be mistaken on.
No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that one. It's a different one. I don't know the page number, but it's got like a bunch of little insets, and it's kind of like, stand up straight and brush your teeth and all these just kind of silly actions that you can do.
Well, I'm going to definitely look that one up again once we're off the show. I just opened the page if people have the book, it's on page 70, but the one that you drew of Jeff Erlanger, that's a great illustration, and you're right, that's one of the really strong memories when I think about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. That's one of the shows that I think of. So well, that's great. And again, the book is just so packed full. I can't believe you did it in the amount of time that you had, but there's such care that's taken with it. I even love how the book opens up, even before you get to the land of make-believe scene. I just love the stoplight and picture, how it says good day, when you open the book, and it just has a real sense of warmth and of welcome there. So we really want to congratulate you on such a job well done. I know I'm sure it's not always easy, but boy, you sure make it look like it is, and so I really appreciate your work in this book.
Thanks.
Well, it's so appropriate, I think, that you were the one to illustrate A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, this book, not just because your pictures are great, but also, like Fred Rogers, I feel like you probably, through your work, have a great connection with children, but I also understand that you're a musician as well, just in reading about you. And I wonder, would you mind, because I'm a musician too, I'd love to just hear about some of the music that you play and write. How would you categorize yourself, or how would you describe yourself? Not categorize, I don't like that term necessarily, but just kind of describe yourself as a musician for us.
I think that was, again, I felt like that's a lifetime ago. It was really before I started getting into writing children's books. So I was in a lot of like folk. It was kind of like folk band. So just a lot of singer-songwriter kind of style.
Sure.
And again, that was, I think, my way of just writing. A lot of it is just kind of storytelling, inspired by, stories in either a magazine or a newspaper, or just my own personal stories. So I have a couple albums out there, which is kind of funny. But I really don't play as much as I used to, for sure, now that I'm writing children's books and just the busy pace of that and having kids. I don't get out and play quite as much as I used to. But it is still fun just to, I probably play the banjo a lot more, just get out the banjo and play songs that I like, just cover songs
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So,
So
um,
when you say banjo, do you play more in the folk style of banjo, or are you more of a bluegrass player, or what kind of style would you categorize your banjo playing
uh,
as?
yeah, I would say it's probably more, folk kind of,
Okay.
and I really enjoy like really old timey, like clawhammer kind of style banjo, music. Um, So if anything, it'd probably be, if I was going to start playing again, I'd probably lean more into that sort of
Yeah.
old timey sound.
Well, I really wish that we were doing like a televised episode right now, because I feel like we would be in your studio looking at your artwork, and then I'd have you grab a banjo and we'd play a couple tunes together or something. That sounds like a whole lot of fun.
Yeah,
But I love all of the different ways that you create, that you write songs, and you're right, you do at some point have to decide, which thing I'm going to narrow down and do the
yeah,
most of. But I really just appreciate I think your overall approach to art, because I feel like you're able to maybe express your heart through what you're doing, and it's very obvious to see the joy that's coming off of the page whenever you're writing,
Hmm.
and the way that you just bring not just these illustrations, but I've been enjoying looking at some of your other work online, and I'm looking forward to finding out more and more about you as time goes on. But I wonder, as we're talking about all of the different creative endeavors that you're a part of, what's next for you? Is there anything you haven't done yet in your career that you would really love to do?
Yeah, and it's funny you should ask that. I was, as the year closes up and another one begins, of course, we all start thinking about new goals.
Mm-hmm.
And really this last year with a lot of really fun milestones, to be able to be part of, from the New York Times bestseller to working with the Muppets and, just the Moby Shinobi series getting to be a chapter book now. So there was a lot of really exciting things, but there's also just, I feel like I really started to just feel some creative fatigue and
Mm.
just the pacing of it. So, my wife is really challenging me as well. Just like, what are some other avenues that you want to, explore and make sure you don't just kind of get burned out in this one direction. So I've been thinking about, again, I want to do a lot more with puppetry. I've always loved it. I just haven't had time to, other than at book events is when I kind of perform the different characters.
Mm-hmm.
So, getting to learn a little bit more about puppet making is something I'm kind of wanting to do. And then some voice acting is also, I've always loved just doing different voices. So those are two avenues I think would be fun to explore. But again, I have still quite a few books in the works coming up for next year, which is
Sure.
still exciting. A couple new Mr. Rogers ones in the pipeline, which is fun to
Oh,
be part
great.
of, continuing that story. Um,
Are you able to give us any sort of description of those books yet, or is it too soon to,
yeah,
to kind of let the
I
cat
can't
out of the
quite.
bag?
Yeah, I can't quite yet, but it's just kind of a fun addition off the poetry books. They'll be through Quirk again, which is
Great.
um, and then again, the Moby Shinobi books are now becoming chapter books, so I'll be releasing those three in the new year, and so there's a lot of just work still that has kind of been in the process and will continue into the new year. But again, just still exploring. Um, I think I was going to share too, real quick. The neat thing about working on the Mr. Rogers poetry book was speaking about kind of creative burnout. I was really in a place of just feeling really, just uninspired and struggling with just the creative process at that time. And it was really neat to just see how, again, I said it was kind of a godsend, but it was one of those
Mm-hmm.
things that, just going back into the Mr. Rogers neighborhood and watching the episodes over and over as I was working and listening to his music and, have so many of his records that would just put on repeat all day. And, even just listening to, he has that series of, those three little books, that, that he has, just You Are Special
Mm-hmm.
and then also just some of the audio or the auto or the biographies that came out, the Maxwell King one and
Yeah.
Amy Hollinsworth has one,
The
just about
Simple
his
Faith of
faith.
Mr.
Yeah.
Rogers. Yeah, wonderful book. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was really neat just to be going back in and just listening to these. It was just like constantly, it was just the creative cave was just filled with the messages of Mr. Rogers and it felt like it was just at the right time. I just felt so it was like a transformative process, not only just working on the book, but just, I felt like the book was working on my heart. And that was, for me, again, it just felt like it was a neat way that Mr. Rogers kind of came into my life in a different way. So
Yeah.
I think that was kind of what influenced a lot of the book and why it comes through that joy and that spirit of Mr. Rogers. 'Cause I think it was filling the space that it was being created in. So that was amazing.
Yeah, well, and he did have a way, and he was very intentional about on the show talking as though he was addressing one person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of that, you really do feel like he's talking to you, and there's such a connection that I think so many of us feel. I'm really glad you mentioned the book You Are Special, because not only is that one of my favorite books that he wrote, but I bought the Audible audio book of him reading that book, and it's probably what inspired the most me to start that Twitter account, was just him with these little phrases throughout the book, just talking to you, and I needed it, at the time. I thought I really need these graces in my life that he's kind of bestowing upon me, and I did. It felt very personal, like, wow, I'd have my earbuds on at the gym or somewhere, and I think it just feels like Mr. Rogers is just talking to me and lifting me up right now. And so I love hearing that you were that book specifically was a part, and also Amy Hollingsworth's book is incredibly good, The Simple Faith of Mr. Rogers. To be honest, there's not too many out there that I haven't read, and I think all of them are unique, and all of them kind of approach Fred Rogers' life from a little bit different angle. And it feels like even with all of the books and the illustrations and the stories and now the movies and documentaries, I still feel like we're just barely scratching the surface of getting to know the man, in a lot of ways. So that's really great. And all of us are very complex as people.
Yeah, it really is. And that's the other exciting thing, is that there, like you mentioned, there's so many books that have just come out even this year. Gavin Edwards, his Kindness and Wonder was another one that just, again, every time I've listened to these books, it's like you said, you find a new aspect of, his life that is really connects with, your own story, or just a new way to appreciate him. And again, like the movie, that was amazing. I hadn't known that story either. And even through that, it's been fun just, getting to know, now Joanne's, kind of sharing more of her story. And so it's really neat to just start to experience not only, Mr. Rogers' story, but the life of the people that were in his neighborhood, as you would say. And it's just neat to see. I'm always saying, well, Mr. Rogers, I just learned this from Mr. Rogers. I often tell my wife, it's not my religion, of course, but it really is just amazing to see, just how it parallels. A lot of just his faith came through in the messages, and it's messages that we all need to hear today. I think a lot of people say now more than ever, but I don't think it was just as much then as it is now. But it is neat to see that people, just as I even, World Kindness Day just this year, going out and being on, doing a book or a school visit, it was just neat to see how these teachers and, librarians and students are all just really embracing this message of kindness, and how it really is influencing the way they're treating each other in the classrooms, on the playgrounds, and in their own homes. I mean, it's really neat to see how it does make an impact.
Yeah, and it's been wonderful for me as well, just running the Mr. Rogers Say Twitter account with now over, I think we're close to 52,000 followers at the time of this. And I get to see a lot of that every day, and I'll get messages from people, and I get a lot from schools, and people will send me maybe little video clips sometimes of a choir at an elementary school that's singing a Mr. Rogers song, or different events that they'll do, and kindnesses, and it's been wonderful for me also to just get to meet special guests on my show like you. They get to come on, and we get to know each other a little more. And I really feel like there's a universality. I'm not sure what the correct word is, but it feels universal. We'll just put it at that.
Oh, for sure.
in the way that people respond to something about his life and who he was. And I feel like he is a great source of help and inspiration and grace to so many people. So
Yeah.
well, Luke, this has really been a wonderful visit, and I wanted to ask you just one more thing before we end our conversation together today. But a few moments ago when we started our conversation, I had a look inside your studio there, and you've talked about puppets a few times, and I was able to see a couple of Kermit the Frog puppets, it looked like, across the room from you there. And I'm just curious about your take on the way that Fred Rogers did puppets, because he really left a lot to the imagination,
Oh, yeah.
not having puppets that the mouths moved or anything. I'm curious because you do love puppets so much. What was your thoughts about? Because I find that some people really feel like when they go to the land of make-believe, that's when they would disconnect from the show a little bit. Whereas other people find that really that puppet time was very inspiring for them. And so I just kind of love to get what your reaction was when the show would go to that part of the neighborhood.
Yeah. Like I said, for me, I didn't even, I don't think you even noticed that their mouths weren't moving at the time, because I think that was the gift that Mr. Rogers had to his puppetry, is that his voice and the way the emotion that his voice carried. When Daniel Tiger would, say he was sad and just kind of duck his head a little and hold his arms in, you definitely knew what he was saying. You knew what he was feeling. And even just Lady Elaine Fairchild, who frightened me to death as a child. I've come to have peace with her now, but even just the way that, just the look of her, she had this kind of, cranky, but also a little bit, she just was always kind of a little bit mischievous, but I think that was just their personalities. It was amazing how, without any words or mouth movement, you knew exactly what they were saying. You knew exactly what kind of, emotions they were sharing. So really, I think that was the magic that he had. And I mean, as a kid, I didn't really realize that Fred was doing all those voices. As a kid, you're just watching the show thinking, wow, there's a lot of puppeteers back there. And then to find out that he was doing all that work is just even more a testament to the fact that he really wanted his messages to come through. And that's what I loved about the Won't You Be My Neighbor documentary, where they kind of mention how he was maybe, a little bit King Friday in himself, a lot of, like he might have had a little bit of those personalities from each puppet, or they were somebody in his life, and that's where he was pulling those from. So, pretty special puppeteering style.
Yeah, and it's neat for me to see, too, the way that especially children will react when a puppet's in the room. And just the way that, that puppet just comes to life, and it doesn't matter if the mouths are moving, or even if you're not a very good puppeteer sometimes. It's amazing, even with our son, how at times matter of fact, we have one of those little, it's not a puppet, but it's a pop vinyl figure, Mr. Rogers, and he's like holding the trolley, and at times I'll talk to him through that, and it's just amazing the way that he'll open up at times and be able to tell us things about his day that I don't know if he's too bashful or shy other times, but I've seen that with so many kids, and I think that's a very special connection that we have with things like puppets, and that was a real gift. Well, for all of our listeners, I want to just one more time remind you that if you go to our website at welcomeneighbor.podbean.com, we will have links to Luke's work and a way for you to be able to buy some of his work and support him and what he does. And you can also just go to his website. If you type in lukeflowers.com, that'll take you to his work, or lukeflowerscreative.com. But again, we'll make sure and have all those links for you as well. And I'll definitely make sure and post a couple of posts on our Twitter account, because we want to make sure that people are well aware of what you're doing, and we want to thank you for the good work and the way that you're helping to really preserve the work and the memory of Fred Rogers, and I'm just very proud of what you're doing, so thank you for that.
Well, thanks, Rick. Yeah, and I just want to say thanks for all that you do to help carry that torch that Mr. Rogers shared with all of us. I think between you and Tim, that runs the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood Archive, I think it's just been really neat to see how you guys have been doing this for much longer than I have. So I'm just happy to kind of join in with you guys and some of the other people that are really celebrating it. So.
It's always great to meet new neighbors, that's for
Yeah.
sure. Well, Luke Flowers, thank you for stopping by for a visit today, and just for all that you do. We really appreciate you, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, thank you. This was special. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us here this week in the neighborhood. Music featured on today's podcast was Nouvelle Noel by Kevin MacLeod, and I also want to thank the @MrRogersSay community on Twitter. Thank you for being there every single day. I'm your host, Rick Lee James. My Twitter account is @RickLeeJames. My website is rickleejames.com. My other podcast is Voices in My Head, the Rick Lee James podcast, and I look forward to being with you again next time. Until then, remember, you make each day a special day. You know how? By just being you. There is only one person in this whole world like you, and people can like you exactly as you are.